All right. Hello. We're live. This is episode 3 of the HTUP podcast. We're here with Amánda Efthimiou, and we're super excited. To get us started, I'm going to invite Lou to guide us through a brief meditation.
Right on. Thank you, Jack. Welcome, Amanda. So we'll just get started by gently closing our eyes. And for listeners, if you'd like to skip ahead, if you don't feel like meditating, this will be about a minute or two, but I do encourage you to join us. And begin by bringing attention to the sensation of breath, not controlling or altering the breath in any way, but just noticing how it feels in the body. See how you can relax more deeply with every exhale, and how you can elongate the spine with every inhale, coming into your optimal posture, relaxing the shoulders on your next exhale, bringing attention to the face and the muscles in the face, noticing if you're holding any tension in the face and allowing the face to relax. Again, using the exhales to relax. You might let the mouth open, let the jaw drop. You might relax the eyebrows and any tension you feel in the eyebrows. And once the face feels sufficiently relaxed, bringing attention to the arms. You can do both arms at once, just feeling where your arms are at right now. Continuing to breathe deeply, fully, and again letting the arms relax. Letting every exhale sink you deeper into this moment. And finally, taking a moment to notice the support of the earth below your feet or below your sit bones, and bringing gratitude to the heart for the support of the earth below. Bringing gratitude to the sky above for the envelope of air around you, caressing the body, giving thanks to the sky above, and gently reopening the eyes and coming back to each other.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you.
So I want to do some context setting here because all three of us are in different parts of the world right now. So I'll go first, and then we can just take turns introducing where we are and how we ended up here. So I'm in Nelson, British Columbia, Canada. I was drawn here by the crystals and no, I'm kidding. But there is a ton of crystal in the ground underneath Nelson. And a lot of people are drawn here because it's a very spiritual place. So perhaps there actually is some kind of connection. But I just love it here. I live in the mountains, and it is, an incredible place. I used to live in Vancouver, and it was just a really busy place, busy city. And then a year and a half ago, I drove my bus out here and was like, okay, this is going to be home. So that's me. Lou, do you want to go next?
Totally. So I'm calling in from Costa Rica. I've been here for about a month now. And I came here with the intention of being near the ocean and enjoying the heat, which I am now reconsidering. Although I can't complain. It's nice to be in the sun every day. I think that's actually what drew me here is sun. I also came to Costa Rica to work or volunteer to create the volunteer program at Holos, which is a retreat center. And deepen my facilitation skills as a yoga teacher, meditation teacher, and breathwork facilitator, as well as a guide or psychedelic facilitator. I still don't know what the proper term for that is yet, and I'm still exploring different terms, but yeah, that's me. I don't plan on staying here too much longer. I do want to come back to BC, which is where I used to live, but I definitely feel like I'll be coming back to Costa Rica in the future. Thank you. Amanda?
For me, I am currently in Brazil, in the northeast coast, in a place called Recife. It's actually the place of my origins. I'm with my family at the moment. I'm based in Portugal, but I do spend quite some months of the year in Brazil, in all parts of Brazil, but I'm mostly here. I actually just this morning was in the ocean. Speaking of the ocean, Lou, I'm right on the beach. So I have a very beautiful life here. And it's also, when I'm here, I'm always reminded of my origins, of my ancestry and where I come from. I've been spending quite some time in South America lately. I actually just came back 2 days ago from the jungle in the Ecuadorian side, so the Ecuadorian Amazon. I was there with a community, a Sarayaku indigenous community, and I took about 2 days to get back here to a very different side of the world, of a continent rather, but also still very much in this summery, wet, humid environment, which I love personally.
I think it might be helpful, Amanda, if we start with just building on what you just shared. If you could share a bit more about your bio, your background, and any notable milestones that really stand out as like what has brought you to living the life that you do live.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, a bit about my background and I guess why I'm here speaking with you both today. I consider myself a psychedelic wellness advocate, an integration educator, and always a human in progress, always a student of life. And what brought me into this space of plant medicine and psychedelics was actually many years ago when I realized firsthand and I experienced firsthand how this can really help people, not only my friends, but myself. I grew up as a teenager suffering from depression and anxiety, and I was a walking pharmacy, as I like to say, taking all kinds of pharmaceutical drugs and not really addressing why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And at the time, I think this many years ago, it really wasn't an option to look at more holistic modalities like breath work or even meditating and taking a moment to close our eyes and breathe. And so, yeah, I came upon this community of people that were doing things a little differently, and they taught me meditation. They taught me what it's like to be more living in my body. And it was through that process that I came upon plant medicine. And needless to say, it opened a door for me. It didn't really solve or cure me in any way, but what it did was it actually brought me back to my body, and it made me realize that I'm the one that can take charge of my own healing process. And so it was through plant medicine that I was able to work through a lot of my difficulties. But then I went and I brought that to the back of my mind, and it was still maybe too early to speak about this with others. I went back into the tech world working with startups, but there was sort of this voice that kept saying, you really need to do something about what happened to you, and share this with the world and have a message because it's important. But first, I needed to get some more credibility, as we like to say, from an academic perspective. I went back to university. I did my degree, my master's degree in neuroscience and psychology, specifically focusing on the effects of plant-based medicines or fungi like magic mushrooms, psilocybin, together with psychotherapy for depression outcomes. So I was really interested in understanding why people were even studying something like a psychedelic together with psychotherapy to help people like me who had depression. And while I was working with this degree and finishing my thesis, I came upon this company called Woven Science, and they essentially invest in and incubate companies in psychedelic therapy. So I moved from academia straight into the business world, into the investment side of where the industry is headed, where are these companies being formed, why, how, what are people interested in, and what does the infrastructure look like around making psychedelics accessible for people. And from that point, I began working with their nonprofit, which is now, I'm now one of the directors of, called Puente Foundation. And El Puente, which means the bridge in Spanish, is essentially that. It's bridging the indigenous wisdom traditions with the contemporary practice of psychedelics, whether they're used in a ceremonial context or otherwise. And we do that with El Puente essentially is enabling access and benefit sharing for Indigenous peoples through promoting bioculture preservation, restoration, ecological restoration of Indigenous owned and operated businesses and territories. So essentially what we're doing is we're enabling these sort of reforestation projects, starting with the Brazilian Amazon. And so that was like how it got me to being in the Amazon as much as I am, and coming back to my roots, coming back to Brazil more than ever before. And also in that process is while I was developing this nonprofit, I also realized that we have this very big need that hasn't been addressed on the side of integration and integrating these experiences. For me, the story is about how we personally can be using these medicines safely, effectively, ethically, and then actually integrating them into our daily life. And that's when I began this company called Integra, which, I guess, to answer your question around milestones, so a big milestone for me is to really come out and launch this business that really is actually speaking to what I deeply, truly am passionate about, and not hiding behind some startup in an unknown industry to me, but truly serving people through this concept of integration and how to prepare people and then help them integrate in an ethical and sustainable way. So that's a little bit of my intro.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amanda. And I mean, your background and your work just seems so well-rounded. Like you're helping people to integrate and process their experiences. You're working with different foundations. You have a research background. Like I'm just uh, in awe, honestly. Like I think it's really incredible. So yeah, Lou, you had asked a question earlier. Do you want to revisit that?
Sure, but I also wanted to add that what everything you just shared with us gives me an incredible sense of hope and optimism. Um, I think I can get quite pessimistic sometimes about the psychedelic space because of a lot of what's going on in terms of, monopoly and patenting and just unethical behavior from big companies. But knowing that there are people like yourself who are doing beautiful and honorable work fills my heart with hope, optimism, and gratitude. So thank you. My question was, well, you lived with Indigenous people, and I don't know the name of these people, so I'd like to start by asking that.
Yeah, so I didn't live with them in any long-term capacity. I just want to make
Okay.
it very clear. I was
Okay.
visiting. I received a personal invitation to visit the home of a friend of mine, and she comes from the Sarayaku in the Ecuadorian Amazon region. It's a few hours drive and then a few hours canoe from Puyo, which is the main city bordering that sort of area where a lot of the communities live along the river. And I spent about a week with them just more recently. And it was very beautiful to be there and to just be an observer and a witness of the life that is that I did not grow up in personally. I myself, it was in a way foreign to me, but also not, because I think it just maybe being in this industry and working with these plant medicines and that naturally brings you closer with nature, and so my life has been more and more each passing year more in connection with the natural world, just because of the lifestyle that I have. However, this was a very different type of way of living from my own, and it was just really special to be able to be invited to even participate in some of the traditions that they're working with. Currently, there's this big festival that they're preparing for that's once every 3 years, and so I was with the women gathering the yucca and making chicha and sort of these practices that yeah, for me were very new. And it just how it relates, I guess, to what I do with El Puente is it's really understanding that when we El Puente is a nonprofit, we're really aiming to go from a place of listening first before we take any action on any kind of projects or anything that we want to do to help a group of people, right? I do that in quotations because helping is not even, it's a word that we like to say, but it's, what are we actually doing, right? Are we helping? Are we not helping? Are we making things more complicated? So Puente, what Pablo Friedlander, who's one of the directors of the foundation, his vision is that we've been truly practicing is coming from a place first of listening first to what is needed, and then taking action from there, and not having this grand idea of how we want to be of support. And that comes through developing relationships, and it's slower, it's more organic. It's not just, here we have a budget and we want to help in 4 different vectors, and this is what we're going to do, and this is the outcomes. It's a very different way of approaching philanthropy. We like to be, consider ourselves in decolonizing the philanthropic model through this foundation. And so it was just a reminder of going and visiting, when you receive a personal invitation, it's without an agenda. This is a personal invitation. I happen to work with a nonprofit and we might be able to support in some way, but it's actually developing these relationships and building trust. And that's something that we are doing. And we do that on the ground, largely in the Brazilian side of the Amazon, outside of Acre, which is the westernmost region in Brazil. The capital city of Acre is Rio Branco, and that's a site of where many of our projects are being developed now. So we are working in the Amazon at the moment.
Wonderful. Yeah, I really appreciate just hearing that and the reminder to listen first and to come from this place of understanding. And it also makes me think about how that's a really good process, or can be a really good process for our inner work when we're working with plant medicines too, right? This idea of like not jumping to conclusions, especially when we're working in what like these imaginal or archetypal realms. If we go into a plant medicine experience or any kind of altered state, and I think especially for me in my experience, like as part of the Western world, we tend to judge things really quickly and try to make sense of them really quickly. And that, I think, we can get in our own way when we do that, in the same way that we can get in our collective way in any project when we say, oh, I know what the answer is, rather than really sitting with what is and just observing and getting to know it. So I think that's really special and important.
I also really like what you said about decolonizing philanthropy and the idea of coming in to build relationships organically without an agenda. When I see a lot of the, reciprocity initiatives in psychedelic companies, sometimes I have this feeling that, there's an expression, I don't know what it is, but like the white man's helping hand, it's like you're continuing the same unwholesome patterns of like, oh, we have the resources, we're going to help you with these resources, and there's something if I can say wrong about that dynamic, I find. And so it's really cool to see that some people are trying to figure new ways out of approaching the whole philanthropic game or mission. And so I'd love to, our podcast is called How to Use Psychedelics. So I'm curious if I'm sorry, I forget the name of the peoples you were with. Could you repeat it for me?
Yeah. Yes, the Sarayaku.
I'm curious if the Sarayaku have, a relationship to psychoactive or psychedelic plants, and what that is like for them. In any way that you might have learned with your brief time with them.
Well, because I didn't experience a ceremony with them and the way that they do it, I can talk about perhaps my experience with another indigenous community that I did experience a medicine ceremony with. In this particular instance, I was an observer. I was there to really understand and to be. It wasn't for my own, I didn't have a particular healing I needed to do. I was there as very much a guest. And so my relationship with the medicine was of deep reverence and respect, and to do so, but also to stay as a guest and as an observer of this. This was not my time to be involved more deeply, which was also very new for me, and I think is interesting for listeners who their first instinct is to go in and like, okay, I have this big intention and I got to heal this trauma from this experience, and here we go. I'm going to be here, and the shaman or the page is going to come and do his magic, and then I'm going to be better. Or, it's very much about me, or this is individual healing. And that is necessary, of course, because that's what this medicine has come to our world for a reason, so that we can observe it and work with it. And there's also this element that perhaps is slowly also being understood by us who are non-Indigenous, in that this isn't about only us. This is about how we're affecting our world. This is about our relationships. This is about our environment. And for me, that's what I talk a lot about with integration. Integration starts with the self, but the goal is to find ways to be better humans in this and make a true impact on our society. And so for me, reciprocity is also that understanding. Individual reciprocity is an understanding that we're doing this in service of others and not just ourselves. Even if we're consuming this medicine and doing this work, there's something greater than us in that outcome. And that's what I really felt when I was there as the observer. They're doing this for others. And it was very, very embodied for me.
Thank you. I really resonate with that perspective of, healing and taking psychedelics isn't just about oneself. For a long time, I was very focused on reaching spiritual enlightenment. It was all about me reaching spiritual enlightenment as a teenager. And then through the years, I've learned that, that enlightenment is found through my actions and how it ripples into the world, into the social fabric, as well as the ecological fabric that we're a part of. And I mean, those are so fundamental teachings I've received from psychedelics, that I am part of a greater whole, that I don't exist independently of that whole. Jack, I'm curious if you have any questions you wanted to tap into. Otherwise, I have some more questions.
One thing that I am curious about, Amanda, and you touched on it a bit, is just, there's such a explosion of people going to Mexico, South America, different parts of Central America, and wanting to have these experiences. And I think there's often a lot of expectation. And when it comes to the conscious use of psychedelics, I'm curious if there maybe is one or two pieces that you think there's a lot of misinformation around, or that it's helpful for people to consider before going into one of these experiences.
That's a really good question. And you're right. There is this explosion of people wanting to fly over and go into the jungle and have this authentic experience, whatever that means. And then they'll come out of it a whole new person and, conquer the world. And there is a lot of expectation, not only for their own inner work, but also for the experience they're about to have. Expectation of this grand ceremony, perhaps, and these wild visions and something that's just so beyond. And there are some considerations, like, how, for me, I feel it's really important we ask questions. Like, we start by asking our own questions, like, are we ready for this? Do we have a practice already that's reaching a transformational state without the use of substances? That could be a very simple question maybe for us, because we're so involved in this world, but it's a real one. Do we have a practice that we do consistently that takes us outside of our normal state? Are we meditating? Are we breathing? Do we have a ritual? Do we have a connection with our own ritual that's entirely our own and not taken from somebody else or somewhere else or another tradition? Have we started creating those systems for ourselves that are really authentically ours? Maybe they're inspired by our family history. but they're really ours and we can own it. And I think it's important we have that deep integrity with our own process, so that when we do attend and have the honor and privilege of being in somebody else's space and somebody else's ceremony, we are acting with integrity and receiving with integrity. And so it is a consideration to do your homework first about who you are, where you come from, how you want to show up, before we show up in the space of another, because we are guests. We are always guests in another space. Even if we're paying for the service of having a healing or transformational experience, we are still a guest in somebody's culture and in somebody's tradition and somebody's spiritual experiencing. And so there's a lot of humility that we should consider that within us before we engage in these practices, especially if we're traveling to a very distant place and immersing ourselves in an environment that we've never been in before. And so that for me is a point of how do we ethically engage. It starts with just that. It doesn't require any outside force except our own to be able to begin that process. And then when it comes to asking questions, there's some practical ones I think that are pretty important and that also reflect our own awareness of sustainability and ethics. And it's, who these people are, what is their lineage, asking for their name and their where they come from and where they learn from. If they're growing, in the case of something like a plant medicine like ayahuasca, are they growing their own medicine? Are they preparing their own medicine? Do they have all the touch points with the medicine before it reaches you? That's, I think when we go to retreats that are outside of the jungle, we go to an ayahuasca ceremony and it's facilitated by someone maybe that we know, but it's not necessarily the case that those people are also bringing their medicine that they prepared themselves, right? So there's also that line of questioning about origins. For me, that's a really important question to at least consider. Perhaps it's not directly from that person, especially if we're talking about retreats and ceremonies outside of the original context. But at least having an awareness to ask that question, it starts this sort of domino effect of, okay, you overhear someone asking that, maybe why is that important? Asking why that's important to ask that question. Then the receiving end, they're seeing that there's the awareness there. And that builds greater and greater responsibility for the medicine that they carry and how they work with it. And then ultimately the responsibility on us as those guests in how we choose to partake.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's so thoughtful. And I think these are questions that it's so easy to forget about or to not even have awareness because we're not used to, especially I think for a lot of people who haven't, whether it's their first time going to a new place with a new culture, or where like so much of what we conceive of when we travel is going to these places that are sort of pre-packaged for us and going into cities. And so I think when we're talking about these experiences of working with a culture that we're not familiar with, or in a culture that we're not familiar with, in a lineage that we're not familiar with, we don't even, for a lot of us, have these. And so it's like a blind spot of this, how to ask these questions, how to have this awareness. So I think what you just shared is going to be really helpful for people. Lou, did you want to ask something or drive the conversation?
Yeah, on the topic of conscious use of psychedelics, I'd love to explore that topic in more depth. In my life, the conscious use of psychedelics has involved a lot of vipassana meditation. You speak of a practice that you have like regularly, and also a very interesting idea you brought up was how we're, I guess, creating our own rituals. And I grew up with no rituals, no spiritual education or religious education whatsoever, and psychedelics allowed me to wake up to that facet that I felt was missing. And from there, I was able to develop my own, inspired by Buddhism and yoga mainly, And now that I'm beginning to explore indigenous spirituality a little bit more, first in British Columbia with the Blackfoot Nation's elder, and now I'm hoping also in South America, I'm really looking to learn and to, understand how I can apply some of the principles they use in their sacred relationship to plants, how I can do that in my own relationship to plants, because I'm not interested in copying others or taking what they're doing and applying it to my life. I'm really interested in figuring out what spirituality means to me. I think spirituality and specifically how we relate to psychedelics in a spiritual way is a very personal and individual process that can be shared, but at core is also very specific to the individual. And so I'm curious about your own rituals, practices, and how they relate to your, relationship with psychedelics. And anything you'd like to speak to in regards to that.
Yeah, sure. And you mentioned this how you don't want to take something from another. There's, before I answer your question, there is this aspect of, like, I like to say, appropriation versus attribution, right? So what we're seeing in this industry a lot is this appropriation of culture, whether it's the actual facilitation or the ceremony, but also in the people wearing jaguar teeth or feathers or something of another culture, and acting as if when they're facilitating they are from that lineage. But there is that distinction of attributing, and really, if we are to talk about a certain indigenous cosmovision or spiritual principle or philosophy, that we're attributing it to the individual, to their community, where they're from, and be specific that this is from them and this is representing their voice, and it's not this indigenous voice. What does indigenous mean? And there's so many different communities all over the world with very unique perspectives, and that's something that I hope that when we're more impeccable with our word and how we speak about these traditions, that we're doing so remembering that we can attribute, and we do so with like very specificity on the person. In the same way, we like to quote philosophers, Stoic philosophers and all this, we don't just say this is one philosophy, like this is a Socrates or whatever it might be. So anyway, that's my little tangent on that part. For me, what practices, your question was around what kind of practices I do and how they relate to psychedelics. I find for me that I do a lot of healing through community, through being in relation with others. I have my own practice. I have a journaling practice. I like to spend time alone, and I do work a lot with the mind in certain phases of my life and needing to write. And I like to write poetry, so sometimes it can be more of a creative practice. And that's really important for me, especially in preparation of and in integrating a specific psychedelic experience. The writing is key. What I find to help me integrate the ways of the psychedelic ways of being for me into a sort of a broader lifestyle is actually community. And I do run women's circles based in Portugal, where I live, and I've been working in circle with women for quite some time, and I find that to be a really helpful practice. And it's a ritual that comes with also its own connotations of where is this coming from? What are the origins of women's circles? I can say that women have been sitting and gathering together and to tell stories for a very long time in many cultures around the world. So it's not attributed to a specific culture that we sit and gather and speak. However, it does have this ancestry attached to it because it is old. It's an old practice, and part of sitting in circle is in a way bridging that old and then having your own rituals that you incorporate into it. And me specifically, there are some rituals that I have within circle that are entirely generated from life experience, and that I feel are unique into my own ways of being and being in the world. So that is a ritual and a practice that I find to be deeply sacred, and no plant medicines or psychedelic substances are used. It's really just the sacredness of the word and of sharing. And I find that to be very helpful, especially in the longer term use of plant medicines, because there is accountability, there's community there. If you need someone to speak with and to share over the course of a period of time, and there's that consistency in the sharing. So I do feel that that's a very deep practice that I have and that I try and maintain. A bit harder when I'm traveling as much as I am, but it's definitely there in my core. And yeah, that, the journaling, and also body work, somatic practices, dancing, movement, shaking. That for me is, we all have bodies, we've all had bodies. Oh, that has no indigenous or not indigenous ancestry, right? Like, us moving our bodies is as old as time, and I can feel that we can all own that ritual for ourselves and move however it is that we feel comfortable doing. And very useful, especially when we're going into the mind, oftentimes when we're with psychedelics, to be reminded that we're also doing this for our bodies, and that that is an equally important component to the process, even if we might be more mind heavy in the moment, because we're depending, also it depends on the medicine, I say this, but um, depending on if we're trying to work through something or understand something about ourselves, it's helpful to remember that we can do that just with the body, and leave the mind kind of on its own for that period. So I hope that answers a bit of your question.
Definitely. Thank you. Um, I feel like a lot of the practices you speak of for me came to my awareness because of psychedelics. And so psychedelics have been the seed from which things like integration circles and dance, ecstatic dance, meditation, breath work have come from. Recently, I heard my breathwork teacher say that psychedelics for him were a path to breathwork, and I, in a way, very much resonate with that. And for me, psychedelics have been a path to breathwork and meditation. Um, yeah, and I also really like the mention of the sacred word. That's something that's come into my life more recently through a friend and mentor of mine, who helped me realize the importance of words and how we use them and how we pronounce them, how we use our voice. And that's something I'm still learning and integrating. But thank you.
I find it so interesting that these practices are coming to people through psychedelics, like the more, not basic, but they're for me the almost the preparatory practices of breath work and movement, and these things that we have had more access to in the past, and that now we're having more access to it because of our experiencing of some altered state. It's such an interesting inversion of like the development, right? I think in a more, in an ideal society, we have had access as children to these sort of things. I know if I was a child and I was suffering the way I was with this anxiety, this crippling anxiety I had as a teenager, if I was, if I was shown that I could just meditate or breathe or dance or make art as a therapeutic practice, then I wouldn't, get into that cycle of needing to take all these drugs. And then ultimately it led me to plant medicine. But that's also what leads people to doing this work, is because they're already suffering, and then they kind of go backwards and say, oh, actually these practices I can do anyways. I don't need to be unwell to do these practices to get well. This is part of my life. And so I think maybe we're similar in age, perhaps. Like, we're of this generation where now we're taking psychedelics to be able to understand that we don't need them to do the basic stuff for ourselves. And I'm so fascinated by this, because at least for me, I really hope that ultimately we know that because we're the medicine, we really are the medicine. This altered state that we seek is is not the end goal, and that's not even done as much as it is now. And it's really about those daily, breathwork practices that we have access to without anything. So it's fascinating, the time that we're in.
Yeah, I totally agree. It makes me think of there's an old quote from Alan Watts about psychedelics that maybe both of you know, but when you get the message, hang up the phone. And I think we can take that to mean what we want. And I don't think, for me at least, like I have been through periods of, oh, do I ever want to take psychedelics again? And I think there's always something for me to learn by coming back to them. But I think what's really important to emphasize is what you said, Amanda, like the to live a spiritual life, to build a spiritual life, or whatever word you want to use, but not just to have these spiritual experiences that, are so, I guess, are so easy to leave behind or to disconnect from if we're not reconnecting to them on a regular basis.
Right, integrating the spirituality into your day-to-day life. And the same quote, I think, from the "If you get the message, hang up the phone." I think before that he says a biologist doesn't keep his eye glued to the or to the microscope, but he looks, learns, and then takes a step back to figure out or work with and integrate what he's discovered through the microscope.
Yeah, I think it's just in general integration for me. That's what we're all talking about, is why this
Right.
whole concept is so important and often misunderstood, I feel. We talk about integrating, but what does that actually mean? We get so easily caught up in the practical of, okay, integration means step one, write it down. Step two, do this. Let's share this. It's very, yeah, but it's really taking a real look back and sitting with the whole picture and understanding that this is a life. This is our life, and we're choosing to do things a certain way, and to be really intentional about what we're doing. And for me, that's the key. Really intentional.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jack.
Okay. I want to build on that because I agree so much with what you're saying, Amanda. It's like the we I've written, and I've seen a lot of places people say integration is a process. But when we call it a process, it's almost something that becomes separate from us. And it's something that I'm going to go into this process and then I'm going to be done with this integration process. And I think that word process is actually, it doesn't have the long-term relationship that I think we are talking about here is so critical. And maybe we should start saying something like integration is a lifestyle, or integration is, it is, we're always integrating.
If I may, Jack, just quickly, I've started telling people and myself that integration is life. I mean, life is itself, I think, an integrative process. Even separate from the human itself and our experience of it, the way things evolve and come together and separate, it's all a form of integration. Um, I think. But please carry on.
No, that's a perfect bookend to what I was thinking.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I think we could go so much deeper on integration. That could be a whole other podcast episode, right? So maybe we save integration for next time.
Sounds good.
Well, I feel like we could open a whole chapter with integration. Was there anything else, maybe more related to the conscious use of psychedelics, we wanted to explore?
I mean, we covered a lot. I feel really grateful to be able to share all this with you and your listeners. And I hope that if anyone can just take away something from this of, what does that mean? Okay, so how do I consciously use psychedelics? It's um it's having a deep commitment to being more aware of what it really takes to be a guest in your own experience. A get like not only a guest. I'm trying to word this in a way, but you're both the guest and the driver of this experience. So how can you do both? Well, how can you do this? How can you partake in this transformation while honoring both sides? And that's for me a way of looking at it. especially when being in the context of going to somebody else's environment and ritual. And that's for me this consciousness that attaches to the use of it.
By both sides, do you mean like self and other
I mean, like,
in a
not
more
necessarily,
principled?
because you can be, I mean, both sides of your own experience, because you are not only a guest in somebody's ceremony, let's say, especially I think of when we're going to maybe an indigenous context and we're really the guest of another's ritual, but we're also deeply respecting our own process that we're having while there. So there's two sides of us that we need to uphold.
Right. Thank you.
So, Amanda, as we wrap up, I'm curious, are you open to having people reach out to you and connect with you through, whether personally or through any of your projects? And if you are, how can people go about doing that?
Yeah, so you're very welcome to reach out. If people are interested on the side of El Puente Foundation, they're very welcome to go to foundationelpuente.org. And if anyone's interested in donating or supporting in some capacity or has questions around that, the work that we're doing, I will certainly, I'm very happy to answer any of that and to share and exchange with people. And on the side of integration, if anyone is interested, particularly retreat centers or different organizations that work with any form of transformational experience, not just psychedelic, but all kinds of modalities, they can also reach me on my website, my Instagram. I can send that over.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And we can put those links in the footer of this on YouTube.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to you both for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for coming. We really enjoyed speaking with you and listening to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And you gave a beautiful kind of ending message, Amanda, about this idea of being both the guest and the driver. And I'm curious if anybody has another quote or really simple piece that we can share to end off with.
Well, I always like to say that you are the medicine. And so that's how I like to end things. Just to remember that you are the medicine.
Right. Everything you need is within you already.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank
Thank you both.
you. Thanks so
Thank you, Amanda.
much.